we sit there and we like you do a post or whatever, we create the link. And then before you know it, like with how many members we have, because we have 24,000 members over there, like we end up getting like 10 spots down from like where we originally were. And if we don't get comments right off the bat, then Facebook, we get lost pretty much in there right away. But this is a DFS show, so I don't really care as much about, the comments, the questions or anything like that. We're just here to win people money because that's what we do. That's what we do. That's why I spent freaking close to 5 hours on this stupid show sheet. But let's go ahead and let's kick this episode off. Ready to do this shit? You good?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, let's go.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
We need to get a counter or something. I need to get Corey to put together a cool little, clip, a video for that intro, right? Because the intro is badass, but when people are sitting there watching the screen, it's just a white screen. Like I've been sitting there trying to get like stuff actually like added to it, like the outside, like, go visit youtube.com/fantasyintervention, hit subscribe, like, for the outsides, but nothing's been done yet. Anyways, guys, welcome on into Fantasy Intervention. We have yet another episode coming at you guys for the Sunday slate for DFS. That's right. We're here to help you guys win money. We are. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, I can't do this alone because it is such like a galaxy brain type, I guess, contest that there is so much. There is so much that we could actually play with these lineups and with some of these, smaller wide receivers, with the whole COVID thing happening. Like there's just so many different combinations. So I had to bring in Eric, right? What's going on, Eric? How you doing, man?
Hey, how's it going, Chase? Yeah, these playoff slates they're a good time, right? I'm a bit more of a cash game player myself, so I use these shorter slates as my opportunity to get a little weird, throw some GPP darts out there.
I wish that I was like I really wish that I had the self-control in order to just do cash, because I would probably be like a millionaire by now if I just did cash games. But I don't have the patience, man. Like I want to sit there and I want to play all the tournaments. I want to make all the big time money.
Yeah, so anyone that purports to be a cash game player really means that they just support chasing the GPP dragon with their cash game profits, right?
That's the best way to do it.
Plus or minus a couple of bucks every weekend is basically where the cash game players sit, so they can support going out and chasing those big paydays.
That's the reality of it, and that's what I try and tell people. I don't follow that advice because I usually use all my money, from each week going towards GPPs, but that's what I tell people to do. So, man, we got a crazy lineup for you guys. This is something as to where, like I said, we have different opportunities, throughout the slate as to, God, man, these dart throws, these flyers, it could be absolutely nuts. But I was sitting there and I'm looking at it, and first off, it is so much more smooth than the Saturday slate. The Saturday slate was brutal. Absolutely brutal. I went through that last night. You guys can go check it out. fantasyintervention.com. You'll be able to find our podcast through there. You guys can go check out our Saturday slate. That was brutal. This has a lot more opportunity. But the thing is, like when I go in and I attack these smaller slates, these 3-game type slates, I don't like to sit there and try and do my stacks like I normally do. I actually like to find my studs, find my guaranteed points, and then build the stacks on those according to how much, I guess, cash I have left. So sitting there and looking at it, right? We have a few studs on this slate. Does that make sense, Eric, by the way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly how I think about it, right? On these shorter slates, raw points really matter. So that's where you want to start your builds and then use that to inform who you want to stack around it. So I think you're looking at it the perfect way.
I love that. Yeah, and I'll build around with my stacks, my flyers, my contrarian plays, but I want those studs in there. And sitting there and looking at this slate, the biggest question to me is, do we play Derrick Henry at 9,200? I mean, he makes some of these other studs like Kamara and Robinson, like Allen Robinson, almost impossible to play. So are we sitting there looking at Derrick Henry as a lock to play? Like, it just makes it tough. How are you feeling about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to roster him at least a fair amount, right? Last week I was sweating bullets because I think I had like 95% ownership on Derrick Henry. So I'm usually one to go a little overweight. But on these shorter slates, there is a very real consideration about getting unique in your builds, right? So I don't think you should fade him entirely. He's very likely to be one of, if not the highest point scorer on the slate, right? But I do think it's reasonable to kind of walk down your ownership so that you're a little underweight on him. Maybe 30, 40% of your builds have some Henry in there, and then either use those other spots to get pay up in other areas to find some unique ways to attack the slate, either at the quarterback position or at the wide receiver position.
Well, that's the interesting part, right? Because we were sitting there, we're looking at, injuries across the board. We're looking at the Browns game, like we brought up right before the show started, and how the Browns situation could end up opening up some opportunity for some of the other receivers to get in. The Ravens receivers like Duvernay, Boykin, like they could end up being options potentially, especially if Willie Snead misses time. And the tight end position is almost like a dart throw for the Sunday slate if you fade Mark Andrews and Jared Cook. So sitting and looking at it, like this could be the week where you could actually play Derrick Henry, and he might not cock block you from getting some of these other bigger guys as long as you're willing to take flyers. Bad news is, though, is that you're going to have to take multiple shots on similar lineups with different combinations of these flyers because there are so many flyers this week. So you're going to have to take shots with Donovan Peoples-Jones, who we'll talk about here in a little bit. You have to take shots with Devin Duvernay, Miles Boykin, Willie Snead if he plays, and you're going to have very, very similar lineups in order to find the right dart throw. So are you going to sit there and for tournaments at least, are you going to sit there and try and unroll a bunch of these lineups together with Derrick Henry in there, with Alvin Kamara in there? Is this something as to where you're going to put multiple ones up? Because he faced them earlier this year, and he put up 23.3 fantasy points and hit the rushing bonus. Now, he hit the rushing bonus, I believe. Yeah, he hit it in the fourth quarter and then laid 31 more yards on him in overtime. So he got that extra, 3 points or so in overtime. But, I mean, sitting there looking at it, like, are you going to try and figure out a way to play Henry and do these different combinations of flyers?
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm tackling the slate, right? Whenever I'm playing in GPPs, I tend to sort of cap my game selection into those 20 max games, right?
Yep.
Those 150 entries,
I know
every random combination of these flyers is going to be on a roster, and they're going to burn you, and you're going to lose your bankroll. You're going to hate your wild card weekend, right? So usually I'll target those 20 max, and I'll build around usually about 2 or 3, maybe sometimes 4 core guys, and then exactly as you said, just rotate in those flyers, those dart throws. Rotate in a few pivots, right? So, really it's at least the process for me is all about finding who those sort of lock button plays are, and then just building some variable lineups around that.
Yeah, I mean, sitting there and looking at it, that's actually almost exactly what I put in my notes is you're going to be playing against guys that have 150 lineups, with Henry in there. So I'm almost sitting there and hoping that, like, Henry's actually not a lock for me. Like, I'm not saying, like, you got to go out there and you got to play Henry. He's not actually going to be in probably 40% of my lineups or 50% of my lineups or 60% of my lineups. He's actually going to be probably closer to 20 or so just because of the volatility, maybe even less than that. And I'm actually going to hope that Derrick Henry bombs this week. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No. But I'd rather pivot and get in some contrarian plays as my locks, somebody like J.K. Dobbins, for example, and be able to save some of that money on the back end. J.K. Dobbins for me, dude, 18.5 fantasy points when they faced off last time. And he's something that's becoming more like dependable from week to week. His upside's still a little bit limited, but I mean, 6,600, like that's a smash play. That's almost 3K less than Derrick Henry, 2,600, I believe. So sitting there and looking at it, like 20 red zone touches over the past 6 games, breakout game coming last week. I'm getting excited to play J.K. Dobbins. How are you feeling about J.K. Dobbins?
Yeah, you absolutely should be excited to play J.K. Dobbins, right? He's been one of the more valuable pieces at the running back spot over the last 4 weeks, and yet his price tag doesn't really reflect it all that much. So I definitely think there's a lot of value in playing him. Actually, as I'm starting to piece together my initial builds, I'm actually looking for ways to bounce both running backs in that game. I think it'll be a little bit of a unique way to sort of tackle that game. But
yeah,
also
it's a way to leverage up against Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, there's leverage in Lamar Jackson, and there's leverage against who's probably going to be the chalkiest tight end of the weekend in Mark Andrews, right? So really interesting way to, kind of take advantage of a player who's expanding their role in the offense, who is going to proportionally have lower ownership than some of the higher dollar options and open up some cash savings for you.
Dude, I like that take. And we're sitting there and we're looking at it like the Titans, right? They've allowed every starting running back outside of 2 so far in the season to get 17 or more fantasy points against them. Well, not on the season, but since week 8. All but 2 since week 8. So we're sitting there, we're looking at Dobbins, like we talked about, with the 18.5 fantasy points, included a touchdown. That touchdown actually started a string of touchdowns that has led to 6 straight games with a touchdown. I mean, I'm sitting there and looking at J.K. Dobbins as like a smash play. I might have close to 70% ownership on him, maybe 60%. Like, is he going to be that much owned for you, or are you going to back off a little bit?
Yeah, I'm gonna be super overweight on him too. I don't know if I'll be up to 70% or so, but like I mentioned a moment ago, I'm actually trying to find ways to fit him in with Henry. So the salary confines get a little restrictive with that play, but I'm definitely going to have him in a proportional amount of my lineups, probably closer to 40 or 50%. That value is too hard to turn away. I don't think that he's going to get a whole lot of ownership.
Yeah, I mean,
so I do think that's a really interesting opportunity on the slate.
I love it, man. And honestly, like, I like another person on this team. We're sitting there and you talked about Mark Andrews, who you brought up, and it's like, man, who do I want to sit there and play more often? And honestly, like, I feel like you have to have Mark Andrews or Marquise Brown as a lock. Now, whichever one is up to you, but I mean, Adoree Jackson hasn't been the same since coming back from the injury. I mean, he's only allowed 3 incompletions total while in coverage. You've been back for how many games now? And you've only allowed 3 incompletions total. He's gotten smoked by Cooks. He got smoked by Coutee while in coverage. Devontae Adams scored on him twice. I mean, he's pretty much going to be matched up solely on Hollywood Brown, who has 6 touchdowns in the past 6 games, including 2 last week, and at least 6 targets in all but one of those games. Listen, I know they shut him down the last time they played, but Lamar Jackson, baby, he's found that rhythm. Baby. Like, he's sitting there and he has absolutely gone off over the past few weeks, and sitting there and looking at it like Marquise Brown is the biggest beneficiary of that. So sitting there and looking at it, right, with all the opportunity in the world for Marquise Brown to absolutely explode in this matchup, how do you feel about Marquise Brown?
Yeah, I like him a lot. I think most people, really kind of take a first glance at this Ravens team and they really think about how they're a run-first offense. And largely they have been, but over these last, 4 or 5 weeks where they've really picked up the pace, a lot of it has been running to set up the pass. And Marquise Brown has been the beneficiary of that, right? So I think it's a really interesting spot. Your comment about Adoree Jackson getting torched in like each of his last 7 games is spot on, right? And Marquise Brown profiles is exactly the type of player that can get that quick step past him or make a move and all of a sudden be streaking down the field. So he certainly is more of a boom or bust play, but on these short 3-game slates and largely looking at GPP plays, I mean, he's the exact type of upside player that you want in your lineup. The other thing that I'll note is you were spot on in mentioning that he was completely shut out in their Week 11 matchup, but also he wasn't matched up against Adoree Jackson primarily. His primary coverage was Borders in that game, so he's not even walking into a difficult matchup that he saw a few weeks back. He's got Adoree Jackson, who I think is like the 80th or 90th ranked cornerback matchup on Player Profiler.
Yeah, looking at Lamar Jackson off the play action fake, like you're bringing up, I mean, geez, 69.2% completion percentage. 69.2 completion percentage off the play action fake. So sitting there looking at a great opportunity. I mean, meanwhile, like, he's just been overly efficient, like incredibly efficient. 10 for 18, 3 touchdowns, 17 for 26, 2 touchdowns, 17 for 22, 3 touchdowns. Like, he's sitting there and he's looking just like the Lamar Jackson from 2019, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. but we're still trying to find those locks. So are you locking in Mark Andrews into more of your lineups or locking in Marquise Brown?
So I'm at least in that binary, I'm going to have more Marquise Brown than I am Mark Andrews. I think pivoting off of that ownership for Mark Andrews is a really interesting way to get leverage. So at least in that binary, put me in Team Hollywood. And I think we can give him his name back too, based on how he's played over the last few weeks.
Oh, Steph is not going to like that. Oh my God, I cannot wait to cut that clip out. How many minutes are we in? 15 minutes, 21 seconds.
Love you, Steph.
Oh, he gets his name back, Hollywood. Hollywood. All right, so let's go ahead and let's move on to another player that has people kind of sketched out because he's got a C19 next to his name. He's got the red number 4, on the other side, but on the same line, right? And that's Alvin Kamara. I think he's going to see slightly less ownership. I mean, because we talked about the Derrick Henry of the world, who, by the way, is insanely expensive, but he can still put up the points like we talked about earlier. But we're probably going to see 20% ownership on Derrick Henry. That means we won't be able to get Kamara in a lot of those lineups. So sitting there and looking at it, I think that Kamara's going to be a lot less owned than what we expect. Now, the Bears, they love their linebackers. They got a sick linebacking core that has helped their defense tremendously, but it hasn't translated to a ton of success at stopping the run. Not to mention Roquan Smith. Man, if he's out, this game gets even sexier for Kamara. Because Smith, he's not great at stopping the run, so I'm not really worried about that. But in coverage, he's the 4th best linebacker in terms of covering. Or in terms of coverage. So sitting there and looking at it, like the last time the Saints and the Bears played in Week 8, Smith, while in coverage of Kamara, held Kamara to 3 receptions on 5 targets, and Kamara only got 1 yard. Against all the other players, all the other people that were covering Kamara, he went 6 for 7 for 95 yards. So if Smith's not there, Kamara is going to absolutely smash. It's going to be nuts. He's going to have a field day. Don't forget the last time that Kamara played. What did he do? Yeah, do you remember the last time that Kamara played, Eric?
I think he had an okay game, right?
It was okay, right?
Yeah, I don't know, 60, 65 points, something like that.
People are forgetting about that. I was just talking to somebody earlier, and they're like, I don't
2
know.
weeks ago.
It was 2 weeks ago. He had 6 touchdowns. This is crazy for me. And people are talking about playing Derrick Henry instead of playing Kamara. Listen, I know there's a corollary with some players, that have COVID that just aren't the same coming back. But the running backs typically aren't the ones that have the issues. So sitting there, COVID's not scaring me off. Kamara put up 20 points last time they played. And the Bears, right, have been really good up against the wide receivers. Kamara is a lock play for me. And I wanted to say Michael Thomas would be because Kamara's been producing without Michael Thomas being in there. And Michael Thomas has a great price. But I think I have Kamara over Thomas as a lock play. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I couldn't be more aligned with you. The whole COVID worry, get out of here, right? If we're talking about a full 13, 16 game slate and you want to fade a guy because you have that question mark, fine, right? But you're talking about arguably the 2nd best running back on a 3-game slate. So you just have to put that aside and understand that albeit a risk, it's a relatively low risk to run, and your alternatives are effectively nil. The Roquan Smith point is exactly the way to look at this game. And as we're heading into Sunday, keep an eye on that news, because if in fact he misses the game and it looks like he's at least trending that way, I think all of the middle of the field and underneath passing options, which includes Alvin Kamara in this offense, get a huge upgrade and are likely where I'm going to go to pivot and find a little bit lower ownership. So definitely Kamara in this matchup with Smith out. Definitely Cook a bit more as my pivot off of Andrews. So that middle of the field, kind of mid and short range passing game is exactly where you want to target against this Bears defense. Their outside corners are much stronger, but also relative to their pass defense, the run defense is weaker for what is a fairly decent Chicago Bears defensive crew overall.
I can't figure out what's going on with the run game. I looked up Kareem Hunt's injuries. I try to find why they've been so porous this year. And last year they went first 4 games of the season, fire. And then Kareem Hicks went down, and all of a sudden they just fell off completely. The run game just plummeted. And that isn't the case this year because Kareem Hicks has been playing. I don't understand why their run defense is faltering as it is, but it is what it is. Do you have a reason for it, or?
No, I was going to echo that point. It's really hard to tell, right? There's not that clear corollary between, this person being out or maybe a shift in their defensive philosophy. But it really has been over these last 5 or 6 weeks where they're really letting the opposing rusher gouge them, right? It's really their yards per carry that looks like it's changed over that period of time. And usually that's indicative of a player being out, right? But Hicks is still there. So it's a bit of a mystery, but for whatever it's worth, it's happening. It's happening. It's happened for a long enough period of time where I think we can use it as reasonable basis for our analysis for this matchup.
I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, looking at the other side of this, because this game is getting me excited, man. Like, this game is getting me excited because it's starting to feel more and more like this could be a shootout, which I never expected in a million years when you told me that these two would be facing off against each other on Sunday night. Like, after all the games ended, the playoff schedule was released. It was like, this is going to be a low-scoring game. This game's going to suck. And the more and more I look into it, the more that I think it's actually going to be somewhat of a shootout. So, sitting there and looking at the other side, and actually that's what I wrote in my notes. Without even looking at it, I swear to God, that's what I wrote in my notes. It says, I think this game could be a little bit higher scoring than most are expecting. So with the Foles, with Foles, the Bears only lost by 3 in week 8. Miller, Mooney, and Robinson, they all had double-digit fantasy points. Both Robinson and Mooney got in the end zone. Meanwhile, Miller actually led the team in receptions. Allen Robinson, he's got to be a lock, right? I mean, he had a rough week 17, but I mean, that did something beautiful for him. That made something magical happen. His price just plummeted. It went poof. Like, these are the past 3 weeks for his pricing. 7,200, 7,700, 7,700. Now he's 6,500 because he had one bad week. Talk about nerfing a price. Like, this is insane. Like, this price just went poof and disappeared. Like, what happened? Like, I am so stoked right now. He hasn't been this cheap since Mitchell Trubisky came back in week 12. And guess what? The last time they faced off with Foles, a quarterback, he dominated Lattimore 5 for 6 for 80 yards and a touchdown. Like, come on. Like, you got to lock him in, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And you hit the nail on the head with your last point. It's Lattimore, in my opinion, right? His reputation precedes him. Last year, he had a phenomenal year in coverage. And this year, he's just been sort of I think he's like the 45th ranked cornerback in coverage, and he's given up like 6 or 7 touchdowns in his coverage. So, he very much so is a capable corner, but he's not getting it done this year. And see back to that matchup a few weeks ago, right? So, you couple that with what looks to be just a ridiculous misprice on DraftKings overall, and what you opened your point with, which is, most people look at this game as profiling for a relatively low-scoring affair, and it very well might be. I mean, 47 feels like about the right number, but the point being that sentiment is going to drive ownership away from the offensive pieces in this game. The Saints defense is probably going to be the highest owned piece in the entire slate, and so you're getting leverage off of that by presumably not playing them, but also by investing in the offensive pieces, namely Allen Robinson on the Chicago side of the ball.
Yeah, make sure you all go check out youtube.com/fantasy intervention. By the way, youtube.com/fantasy intervention. Go hit subscribe so you guys can get more content like this. We will be going throughout the entire playoffs. Now, we got 2 more locks, and then we're going to go on to stacks. All right, so another receiver that I want to lock into is Judith Smith-Schuster. I'm going to be chasing the hell out of him. And honestly, he's been really on and off, but sitting there and looking at it, I think they're starting to figure out how to utilize him again. Like, I don't know why they forgot. Like, they had Mason Rudolph at quarterback, I guess. But Juju's sitting there with the 9th most receptions in the NFL. He's the 38th. He's 38th in yards. Like, it probably has something to do with his ADOT being 5.5, which is 5th worst for the wide receiver position. But, I mean, they're figuring out, right? They got to be figuring out. 4 touchdowns over the last 6 games and 6 over the last 9. Over 17.5 fantasy points in 6 of those 9 games. And last week, he torched Cleveland for 18.5 fantasy points. I don't care. I don't care that he hasn't crossed 100 yards with 97 receptions in a single game this season. That still blows my mind. I do kind of care about that. He hasn't crossed 100 yards yet this entire season.
That's wild.
It is wild. 97 receptions, and he hasn't crossed 100 yards.
He's gotten close, right? He's got like a 96 and a 93 or something like that. Yeah,
something like that. He's gotten close like 2 or 3 times, but that's just crazy to me. I mean, the thing is like all these people they talk about, oh, get that 3-point bonus in. Dude, you can keep your 3 points because he's going to give me 10 points off of receptions. So I'm looking right now at MJ Stewart, who's the second worst corner that's actually qualified in the playoffs. And guess what? Juju gets to go up against him. This is going to be magical again. I think Juju's going to go off.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. In kind of the macro sense, targeting pass catchers that are out of the slot and in the interior is typically who you want to prioritize going up against the Browns, so you can avoid Ward there. But since the entire defensive secondary has the Coco, I mean, basically all of these Pittsburgh receivers are in a pretty good position to eat. So for me, the decision is really between Juju and Deontay. And if you stack those two next to each other and one of them is $700 cheaper.
Yeah.
I'll go back to the well of saying that I think I'm going to try to stack expensive running back pieces together in my build. So any and every opportunity I can get to save a few bucks, I'm going to pounce on it. And while Juju is very much so known as a bit more of a floor player, right? You said that he's going to get, a dozen or so targets and catch 8, 9, 10 balls. His upside is actually pretty reasonably within reach because he hasn't hit that 100-yard bonus yet, right? So if he keeps having similar games to what he's seen, but he falls forward a few more times, all of a sudden you're +3, and that's just that little edge to move you up in the paying profile. Exactly. Just lean forward, my guy.
Jeez, man, that's so funny. But it's crazy how they've been using him because they don't have a running game. So he's pretty much the running back / slot receiver. That's what role he's playing. And looking at his points, 18.5, 24.6, 17.5, 17.7, 22.7, 21.3, 13.7, 17.5. That's
steady.
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 games in there that I didn't name, 3.5, 9.8, and 5.9. But the 3.5 game was the game where, I mean, it was probably the best game that I've ever seen. What's the dude from since they used to play for the Vikings, Mackenzie Alexander? That was the best game I've ever seen him play, in my lifetime. And I used to do the show with a Vikings fan, and we always talked about how Mackenzie Alexander was right on the edge, right on the cusp, but he couldn't put it all together, and he was lights out that game. So, sitting there looking at it, I love Juju Smith-Schuster. He is a lock for me. I will have him probably 40 or 50% of the lineups, to be honest with you. That's how much I love him. So, my last lock is a tight end. And I kind of hesitated on this because we do have Michael Thomas coming back. I like Kamara. So, I don't know if this is necessarily a lock. But for the Sunday slate, it just makes a lot of sense. The best game of the season actually came up against the Bears. So Jared Cook, who we look at the Bears and they are brutal up against the tight end. Jared Cook could actually have a very good game. 12 touchdowns allowed on the season. Makes sense. 23 targets for Jared Cook over the last 5 games. Awesome. Attention focus on Michael Thomas coming back. Phenomenal. Sign me up at this point. Lots of ownership is going to be on Mark Andrews. Plus, they have bigger names that are cheaper than him, like Ganu, Graham, Kmet, Ebron. Everybody forgets about Jared Cook, but he has these games where he puts up 15 to 20 fantasy points or he has 2 touchdowns because he gets utilized on the seam routes. He beats them up the middle. I'm loving Cook this week. I'm loving Cook for the Sunday slate. For the Saturday slate, I had Logan Thomas. For the Sunday slate, I love Jared Cook. Do you love Jared Cook as much as I do?
Yeah, I think I do, right? I mentioned earlier.
I think I love you.
I mean,
I just watched.
Did we just become best friends?
I was just watching Yes Man. And
solid.
One of the funniest lines was, "I think I love you." Oh, you think?
I think so. So the only thing that I'll add to Jared Cook is the point that we brought up when we were talking about Alvin Kamara, right? There's a real chance that one of the best sort of short field mid-range defensemen on the Bears, Roquan Smith, is going to miss this game, right? So that's all the upside that you really need, and this is, at least for me, where kind of really analyzing the slate and the pricing for these players comes into play. He's in this weird kind of middling tier by himself, right? There's Mark Andrews, who, all things considered, isn't that much more expensive than him. But then there's this big sort of girth of low-priced options that are all about the same underneath Cook. And I think on this shorter slate, there's going to be a lot of people that are trying to find ways to save money, right? So they're going to be looking at Jared Cook, and they can save $700, $800, $1,000 to drop down to kind of these unwashed, girthy masses at end, and they're likely to go that way, right? Like the way that the pricing falls, I think he is on that sort of weird island where there's not going to be a ton of ownership, and most people are looking at this matchup as probably the lowest scoring affair on the Sunday slate. So all of that stands to give a ton of leverage to Jared Cook for you to roster him.
Dude, love it. Absolutely love it. And I love the girth. Love the girth. The girthy masses. All right, so let's go ahead and hop on stacks real quick, because we have to figure out which players we're building around. Make sure you guys go check out youtube.com/fantasyintervention. Once again, that's youtube.com/fantasyintervention. Make sure you guys hit subscribe. We're going to be going throughout the playoffs and past that. I mean, we have about 3 to 4 episodes planned a week, along with some quick shots. So go check out youtube.com/fantasyintervention and hit subscribe. Man, we got Matt Miller coming in here on next Wednesday. I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Steffi and I, we're going to be partying. And then, of course, we have the drinking and talking fantasy football crew coming in as well. So I'm very excited. So looking at the stacks, we have to figure out what the players we're going to build around, right? So we gave you Jared Cook. We gave you Judith Smith-Schuster. We gave you Alvin Robinson, Alvin Kamara, Mark Andrews to an extent, Marquise Brown, J.K. Dobbins as the guys that we are locking into our lineups, right? What'd you call it earlier? You said something earlier that I actually really loved as a term for these guys, the guaranteed points.
Oh, the raw points guys.
Yeah, the raw points. These are our raw points guys we just named off. So, yeah, those are the raw points. I love that. I'm using that from here on out. It's going to be your turn, but I'm using it. I don't know if anybody else says that, right?
I was never even here.
Wait, does anybody else say that? Am I late to the show?
I mean, I've heard it around, but I don't know if it's anybody's. So if you plant your flag there, I'm sure people will start assigning it to you.
I love planting flags. I'm not going to lie. All right. So even with his pricing, like talking about the stacks, right? We got to chase Lamar Jackson's points. Dude's on fire. He's looking like 2019, like we talked about. And I know that he didn't play, well up against him last time. I understand that, which is why we have other stacks that we're going to attack. But, for this stack right here, I think that he's going to ball out. I really do. I expect him to fully explode, just unload this week all over everybody. And honestly, like we talked about, like Brown and Andrews. So they're studs you can play, but I kind of like playing Lamar Jackson with just one of them and then J.K. Dobbins and, take advantage of the running game as a whole. It's like, God, man, could we pull the trigger on another one of these pass catchers? How are you feeling with Lamar Jackson this week? Are you playing him? And if so, who are you stacking him with?
Yeah, so there are going to be points where I have him stacked up with both Hollywood and with Mark Andrews. At least for me, the whole basis of stacking, especially on these shorter slates, is really trying to double down on that point production, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely think that there's credence to the idea of sort of investing in their running game overall. But I'm probably not going to be looking to stack Lamar with J.K. Dobbins. I'm going to look to have him in the lineup in the games rather the builds where I've got Mark Andrews centered, and then maybe go Tannehill on the run back for the builds where I have J.K. Dobbins built or locked in.
That's actually who I was going to bring up next, but I did want to just, I wanted to bring up Lamar Jackson because I know that, the smart thing to do in GPPs is probably to fade him, but I just love him so much this week, man.
That Titans defense is just hot trash. You look back to a year ago, and they stifled every team in the league, including Lamar Jackson, in the playoffs, the first round of the playoffs. But this is an entirely different defensive unit. If you go back and look through their game logs, every single quarterback is having their season high against this Titans defense. So I definitely think that he's in play, right? But where at least where I'm looking to stack him, it's got to be with some of those pass catching options so that you can get the old double dip, right? So we want
Lamar Jackson, we want Alvin Kamara, we want Derrick Henry, we want Marquise Brown, we want AJ Brown to run it back. Yeah, no, this is getting way expensive.
We're gonna have a bunch of bottom barrels, right?
No, man, I don't even think you could make that lineup work. I really don't. Like, I'd be impressed if you could actually have the guys that I just named off. And yeah,
man, I don't think the matter. You probably have to move Henry to make that work. But I think there are some pivots off of Henry where you can get a pretty reasonable build with those other pieces that you just shot through.
I love it. I love it. All right. So, by the way, I do have a really good feeling about Duvernay, but Boykin's one that's scoring touchdowns, getting the targets. He's showing up big time lately. We're going to talk about them in a little bit, but they do make sense to stack with Lamar Jackson. Tannehill, though, like you brought up, this type of stack could get fun, right? Because the Titans receivers actually put up the third most yards on the Ravens earlier this season when they played the first time. Davis broke 100 yards. Brown got 60 and a touchdown. This game could turn into a shootout towards the tail end of it, like in the fourth quarter, if these teams are getting competitive. They could abandon the run to an extent. But the constant pounding that Henry could set up like this play action fake, kind of like how we talked about with Lamar Jackson. There aren't a lot of great wide receiver options on the Sunday slate. Or there are a lot of great options, for the wide receiver position on the Sunday slate, especially for Flyers, because we want to play these top end running backs. So I don't want to overdo it here, but Corey Davis and AJ Brown are both plays with Tannehill at quarterback. Now, sitting there looking at Corey Davis is more appealing, right? He's sexier. He's 4,800. He's had these games before, and guess what? He just came off a really hot performance, right? But 2,200 less is where everybody's going to flock to Corey Davis instead of A.J. Brown, who for some reason is the most expensive wide receiver on the slate, right? I mean, sitting there looking at it, like playing A.J. Brown could actually be the contrarian play. The other two players in this price range are Michael Thomas and Allen Robinson. So, of course, you're going to want to play these players over A.J. Brown because A.J. Brown's dealing with injuries. Like, is this something as to where, like, if we play Lamar Jackson or even Tannehill, like, is A.J. Brown a play for you in the stack? Like, are you going to have a high percentage ownership of him?
Yeah, I think I am. So I'm definitely targeting Jackson as probably my chalkiest quarterback on the Sunday slate, and I think AJ Brown is actually the run back there, right? And a lot of it has to go back to that roster construction that we've continued to hit on tonight's stream, right? Like, money is going to be tight on this Sunday slate, and so do not be surprised if everybody goes to clicks to each of the various positions and just sort of crosses through the most expensive option, right? So I do think that with that huge price disparity comparative to Corey Davis and Davis coming off of this huge game, that a lot of that ownership is going to go a little bit more towards the cost savings. And AJ Brown is an absolute monster, right? We just finished dogging on how terrible the Titans defense is. Ryan Tannehill, I think, is QB 7 or 8 on the season, and it's because they're always getting boat raced and they're always having to catch up. So I definitely like investing in this Titans passing game, presuming that this game is going to shoot out. And I think that A.J. Brown is actually the spot to look at.
Okay, so if we're still talking about stacks, right, because we love A.J. Brown as a stack at this point. Big Ben, like, he makes sense with this Cleveland team falling apart now. But could we see a repeat game from earlier in the year where he only attempted like 22 passes en route to a 38-7 win? Because I feel like that's what could happen. Like, I mean, I'm sitting there and, like, I know that Big Ben is like, playoff Big Ben is like the real deal. But, I mean, I'm looking at the stacks here and I'm like, okay, Juju's a lock. And then I got to decide between Deontay Johnson and Claypool. And it's like sitting there and looking at it like you can't play them both because Denzel Ward, who should be playing, will be shadowing one of them. He just started shadowing, by the way, about halfway through the year. But, I mean, he's going to be shadowing one of them, right? And I'm assuming that he's going to be shadowing Deontay. But I feel like it would make more sense if he was shadowing Claypool because looking over there at the other side, like, Mitchell struggles with speed guys. And he got burned by Claypool twice in week 6. I believe it was 2 receptions for like 59 yards, if I remember correctly. So, I mean, sitting there looking at it like, hey, I like the Big Ben stack, but if they pull away because this team's falling apart, I mean, how many passes is Big Ben going to attempt?
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm looking at it too, right? I do want to invest in this Pittsburgh offense, but I don't know if this is where I'm going to have the majority of my stacks because just how desecrated that Cleveland defensive secondary is. I do expect that Pittsburgh will score a lot of points by way of the passing game, but I think that it's going to be a fairly quick day in the office for them. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see some really impressive production and paces for the first half of that game coming out of the Pittsburgh offense, so passing offense specifically, but them very much so getting comfortable and running out the clock on the back half. So I do think that you should own those pieces, specifically the wide receivers. I think that you should alternate your exposure to them. Juju's locked in. Look to get a little bit of Claypool in there. Look to get a little bit of Deontay in there. I think Claypool's probably the more interesting play to get a bit of ownership leverage. I think he's going to be the lowest owned of the three. And the reports out of Pittsburgh are that his playing time was walked back to save him for the playoffs. So he does have some upside there. But I don't think that this passing offense is going to be consistently involved enough in this game to where I want to invest heavily in trying to get that double dip or that multiplier on Big Ben and some pass catchers.
Yeah, no, it's something that's where like I feel like you can still play these guys without having the stack, but I mean at the same time, like it's tough to sit there and decide which direction you're going to go. So I kind of want to avoid everybody that's not Juju, unless I'm doing a stack. But yeah, I mean, sitting there and looking at it, like if you do play Big Ben as a stack, you got to play Landry, right? And I'm not rolling Landry out in every single lineup, but the one with Big Ben makes sense. He has he has a touchdown in his 4 out of the last 5. He's kind of like a very low ceiling guy, so I don't love him for tournaments. But sitting there looking at him, Kareem Hunt, who could see some work in the passing game. I mean, Kareem Hunt's 4,800. So if he ends up playing or he ends up paying off with 20 yards on the ground, 4 receptions, 30 yards in the air, and a touchdown, like that's Kamara's floor essentially, I feel like, in this game. So like when it comes to running it back, is Kareem Hunt an option in this game? Is Landry an option in this game? Like where are you running it back if you do play the Big Ben stack?
Yeah, so I think that Landry is an option mainly for the sake of trying to differentiate your lineup. I don't think that he's going to be all that particularly well owned, and the game does profile to where Cleveland will likely be playing from behind. But because of that reason, and this is who I was alluding to earlier, I love me some Kareem Hunt this Sunday. Ooh. It's a short slate, and if you just look through that tier of players, that sort of mid-4, kind of low 5K range, he easily has the highest upside out of all of them, and he also has probably the safest floor, right? He's got the most well-defined role in his offense, and he's walking into a matchup that profiles for him to be featured while they're trying to catch up from what sets up to be a big Pittsburgh league, right? So the spots where I'm looking for salary relief but not having to just entirely punt at a position, I'm moving Kareem Hunt into my RB spot, with that passing game and touchdown upside that he brings fairly consistently. I meant to ask you, and I didn't end up asking you. Like, we're talking about, locks, right? And we're talking about, guys that we definitely want on a roster. Is he considered a lock for you? At this point, are you just playing him where he fits in? So he's probably right in between, honestly. To go back to your favorite term of the night, on these shorter slates, raw points is what I lock in, right? So I'm looking for the guys that are going to consistently score a substantial amount of points relative to the field. And I don't think that's necessarily Kareem Hunt, but he is probably my favorite cost savings option. So I'm going to have a shit ton of them.
I mean, very well said with the shit ton part. So now sitting there looking at it, like he's the most expensive backup, but I don't even know if he'd be considered a backup in this game because, by the third quarter, he could see all the snaps. And with them not having Batinho as an option on the, the offensive line, it's like, and by the way, his replacement, I think, went on IR as well. So sitting there and looking at it, like Kareem Hunt, he's going to see some work. He has to. And the receptions alone, he might not get that many yards overall, but if he gets in the end zone, you're cashing in with Kareem Hunt. So sitting there and looking at, I guess the slate, we got to talk about Drew Brees a little bit because we talked about, the potential of, this being a shootout. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking into it and I'm like, Michael Thomas, smash play. That's amazing. Love me some Michael Thomas. But like outside of that, oh, by the way, you're on the clock, Eric. I don't know what that means. That's from G-Man J, but you're on the clock. So,
we're a bunch of degenerates, so we've already started a startup dynasty draft like 2 days after the regular season ended.
think Stephanie's in like 4 already, and I'm like, you're a fucking maniac because draft season.
We're just crazy people.
Yet. Yeah, draft season hasn't even hit. Once draft hits, you're going to join 8 to 10 league, guarantee it. I'm in 28 this year. I will never do that shit again. I said I wouldn't do 14 again. I'm in 28. It sucks. So sitting there and looking at the Drew Brees thing, I'm like, dude, I don't feel good playing Drew Brees. Like, he has the upside, but I don't feel good about playing Drew Brees. Do you feel good about playing Drew Brees?
No, in no way do I feel good about playing Drew Brees. He was already on a downward trajectory before he broke all 37 of his ribs or whatever it was. And since coming back, they've really leaned heavily on the run game. So nothing that we've seen from Drew Brees production wise on the field this season would really have me feeling particularly confident about playing him. I'll have a couple of shares just for the sake of chasing some lower ownership and saving a little bit of salary relative to Lamar Jackson, but that he's put forward on the field, just how stout this Bears passing defense has been this year. All of these are things that have me leaning away from Brees, apart from areas where I'm trying to get a little unique with my build.
I like Mitch Trubisky though. I like him a lot.
Yeah, I kind of do too.
This sounds dirty. It's
weird. Yeah, I think last time I was on with Dave, I was sitting there picking Trubisky over Jalen Hurts, which totally worked out well. So it's a fantasy intervention tradition for me to just spew all kinds of Mitchell Trubisky love.
It makes sense though. Like, it makes too much sense because we're sitting there. He has a little bit of a rushing upside, but first off, you can't run against the Saints for the running back position, right?
Absolutely.
And if you sit there and you look at the wide receivers and what they did with Nick Foles, like, it could be even better. I mean, stack him with A-Rob and Anthony Miller. Like, PJ Williams is someone that I always attack. And honestly, I felt like I wanted to put Anthony Miller in there as a lock play, but he's not. He's a stack play. So I'm sitting there and I'm going to run out Trubisky. I'm going to stack him with A-Rob. I'm stacking with Anthony Miller. I'm going to fade Montgomery. And I'm going to run it back with Kamara and possibly Emmanuel Sanders. He's a little bit overpriced because, they had to price him as if he would be a starter or, the wide receiver 1 to an extent. Mm-hmm. Michael Thomas is most likely going to be back from the reports that I've seen, but he's going to either be playing up against Jalen Johnson, who gives up big plays constantly, who allows defenders to get behind him. And if Jalen Johnson doesn't play, then he's going to be up against Duke Shelley or Villador. And Villador's been like horrifically just terrible this season and, trying to fill that gap. Teams are just attacking the hell out of him. I love it, man. Like, I mean, are you somebody that feels comfortable playing Anthony Miller, A-Rob, Emmanuel Sanders, and Trubisky in the lineup, and then being able to play some studs? Because outside of A-Rob, they're all cheap.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, go into DK and start your build with those guys and just look at how much money you have left for the rest of your lineup, right? So I definitely love that it gives you a ton of flexibility to spend up in the spots that you want to. I mean, at least for me, I don't know if I'm going to be able to walk away from Michael Thomas 2 price tags, right? I think the difference between them is like $1,000, $1,300, something like that. And with all reports indicating that Thomas will be back out there, the idea of stacking Trubisky is really chasing a lot of upside. And Michael Thomas is the player of those two that has that ceiling. So I definitely think Sanders is a valid play, but it's just so hard to see those two right next to each other on the salary sheet and not lean towards Michael Thomas.
I understand that 100%. You talked about it earlier. Like, you were sitting there and you're like, hey, if I can save a few $100s because of how expensive these players are, I mean, maybe. So we're going to build a lineup here in a little bit, everybody. We're going to build a lineup. Ooh. Yeah, you didn't know that was coming. I left that off the show sheet. We actually built a lineup here to figure out which players want to play.
Spicy.
So maybe we can try and figure out a way to get Alvin Kamara and Derrick Henry in the same lineup.
Ooh, gonna have a lot of Duvernay, a lot of Anthony Miller.
Yes. This could actually provide that to happen. I have not built the lineup yet with them in there, but this could actually provide that. We'll find out here in about 10 minutes. All right, so we have some flyers we have to talk about, maybe in less than 10 minutes, to be honest with you. But, we have some flyers we have to talk about, some guys that could actually make you some money. And what if New Orleans does go up big? What if Mitch Trubisky ends up faltering tremendously and the Saints turn to the run game? Latavius Murray makes sense. Latavius Murray does carry the ball heavy. Alvin Kamara the COVID might have affected him. Unlike what I'm expecting to happen, maybe Latavius Murray actually does handle the full workload past the second or third quarter. Is Latavius Murray a flyer for you, or is that just a waste of money? Are you throwing that in the trash?
I mean, I think he's definitely in play, right? He does have a bit of a role in this offense, sort of regardless of game script. I would think more so as kind of a punt play out of salary, and his floor is higher than 0. So that's certainly a fair consideration. But I really don't think that this game is going to get out of hand all that quickly. So I wouldn't expect an increased workload because of a blowout necessarily. But Murray does have a role in this offense, right? So he will produce, and if some of those handful of carries that he gets consistently are closer to the red zone or even the green zone, he could really pop with some touchdown upside as well.
I mean, just looking at it, with Latavius Murray, when they are up and they're doing their thing, 12 carries, 19 carries, 12 carries. Meanwhile, he saw 3 receptions, 1 reception, and 2 receptions. So 14 touches or more in the games where, they're up big for the most part. And they don't face a tough run defense. So Chicago, we've talked about it, man. They're 10th up against the run, but they've been very porous as of late. So it'll be interesting to see. He's going to need volume in order to produce. But his price, it just makes sense. We're sitting there and we're looking at him. He's at 4,500. So as a flyer, if you're getting down to the bare minimums and you don't want to go on to a Ty Montgomery or a Justice Hill for your running back position, I think it makes sense. I think 4,500. We're looking at Gus Edwards, which also makes sense, by the way. Benny Snell, probably not. These are the type of guys that he's priced around. Kareem Hunt is 300 more, so if you can squeeze that in, I would do that. But
yeah, the decision where I'm going to have him is likely going to be one between him and Hunt, and in that case, I'm very much so leaning towards Hunt. But just kind of listening to those names that you listed off that are kind of in his tier of pricing, they don't really have all that consistent a role in the offense, and Murray does, right? So if you're going to punt and you're going to try to save some money, at least get a guy that gets a pretty steady amount of touches. And Murray, like I said, you can get a few of them. He's well above value, and you're sitting pretty for the spots where you did pay up in your lineup.
Yeah, prior to, I guess he's very spotty with his red zone rushing upside, because he has 6 carries one week and then 6 carries another week inside the red zone, 4 carries another week. But he's very spotty with the red zone rushes. They give a lot of that to Taysom Hill.
Yeah,
it makes me so
everyone's
sad.
favorite.
No, he's not. He's not, because he's never fantasy relevant if he's not the starting quarterback.
Right.
And then he just crushes your soul because he takes away a carry from somebody else, which, by the way, Alvin Kamara could have had 7 freaking rushes.
Easily.
Oh, man. All right, so
Sean Payton.
Let's go on to my next flyer. I think I have Miles Boykin, right? Yeah, Miles Boykin, Devin Duvernay. Miles Boykin has actually been a pleasant surprise as of late. And, he's sitting there, and I'm looking at his snap count. He has 33 compared to 77 for Marquise Brown, 23 compared to 55, 19 compared to 62, 15, 18. And then all of a sudden, in week 13, he outsnapped Marquise Brown by 3 snaps. He's only 10 snaps below him the following week. The week after that, okay, yeah, he lost 2 snaps, but then 1 snap less, 37 snaps less, and he's running routes. They want him out there in the receiving game. And then last week, he ends up turning in his 1 reception on 2 targets for 43 yards and a touchdown. Now, the thing with Miles Boykin, right, is he hasn't caught, outside of the first 2 weeks of the season, he hasn't caught more than 2 passes. So he's very iffy. But he's had touchdowns in 3 out of the last 5 games. So looking at it, Miles Boykin, is he sketchy to sit there and play? He is the sketch of the sketch, but so is Devin Duvernay, who isn't getting the same, touchdown dependency, not getting even anything volume-wise, but always has that big ability to break off a crazy, crazy punt return, a crazy reception. Are you sitting there and are you going to waste some Are you going to waste some cash on Devin Duvernay as a flyer? Or, are you looking at maybe one lineup?
Yeah, well, at least if you're going to force me to build a Kamara Henry lineup, then yeah, I'm probably going to have some Duvernay.
I'm not forcing you
and
anything, okay?
and some Boykin rather. The thing that I think is really interesting that you highlighted is that his snap share is pretty consistent. He's on the field a lot, but what's changed over the last 4 weeks are how many routes he's running and his percent of targets, his target share week in and week out. So his role in the offense is increasing at least at a pretty steady clip over the last month or so.
Breaking out. He's breaking out.
Thing to consider is the alternative, right? I think it's fair to kind of make this binary choice between Boykin and Duvernay, and all indications are that Duvernay is going to have Malcolm Butler covering him this game, which is certainly the most difficult of the Titans cornerback matchup. So, sort of looking at those two side by side, I'm definitely leaning Boykin, and he brings that touchdown upside that you're targeting with these value plays, these bottom bargain, bottom dollar options in a GPP, right? You can spend next to nothing on him, and he has the upside to score you 10, 15, 18 points if he manages to get in the box.
Did we see the practice report for Willie Snead? If you want to look it up while I talk a little bit and waste people's times, because, Willie Snead, when he's been out, it's been a tremendous increase for Devin Duvernay in his snap share. Whole different animal when Willie Snead is in there. But, I mean, sitting there looking Devin Duvernay, I don't think he has an offensive touchdown on the entire season yet. Like, he's had that special teams touchdown. But, yeah, he caught, let's see. I mean, it's been nuts. Like 20 catches, 201 yards, 26 targets, so extremely efficient. Added 4 rushes for 70 yards, and then ran back a kick for a touchdown. But he's not getting the touchdowns that Miles Boykin is. Did you have a chance to look up the injury report for Willie Snead while I was bullshitting?
Yeah, I did. It was a nice little soft shoe there. So it looks like Willie Snead actually returned to practice this week, or rather today. With him missing yesterday and then coming back to limited today, unless something goes sideways, right? If he goes limited or full tomorrow, then expect him to gear up, and we're probably looking elsewhere for our punt plays at wide receiver.
Yeah, not Duvernay, unfortunately. Damn it. I thought I had some, but Miles Boykin is still in play. He's still in play because he plays on the outside. So let's go ahead and let's hop on to Marquez Callaway, who's been a focal point of the offense. But once again, Michael Thomas is coming back. But I think that's going to push out Juwan Johnson, not Marquez Callaway. Marquez Callaway's had his weeks, man, where he's been, insanely efficient. He's been successful, but he's also had a bunch of downers, which has been indicative of his pricing. He's sitting down there at the bottom barrel type pricing for DraftKings. I'm assuming FanDuel as well. $3,100, literally $100 more than the minimum pricing. So sitting there and looking at Marquez Callaway as possible dart throw, I mean, are you intrigued at all? I mean, 8.1 fantasy points last week, 5.6 weeks before that. He did have a week where he put up 15.5. That was all the way back in week 7 up against Carolina. Like, is Marquez Callaway a play for you? Are you going to waste any fab on him, or is he just going to be pretty much trash for you?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to fade Callaway almost entirely this weekend, presuming that Michael Thomas comes back, right? His role in the offense is a bit safer relative to Michael Thomas's availability, but I don't think that Drew Brees is going to be able to distribute the ball to that many receivers, and specifically on the type of plays that Callaway runs. So that's part of the consideration. The other is really just looking at these punt plays around him, right? Willie Snead is a couple $100 more than him and is potentially playing. Peoples-Jones is right there. Anthony Miller is a really interesting play right around that spot. So I definitely think it's fair to consider him. But when you're down at this this level of salary, I do think there are a couple more options that I would lean to first. They are a bit more expensive, so if you only have $3,100 to fit in, he's the guy, right? I'm definitely looking at him over any of the 3K options like Des Bryant or Chris Moore, what have you.
Des Bryant's been getting the end zone, though.
Yeah, but now Willie Snead's back.
Yeah, no, that's tough. That's tough. I mean, I was sitting there looking at Donovan Peoples-Jones as well, but he still doesn't pass the concussion protocol. And here it is Thursday. So that makes me a little bit nervous. But Donovan Peoples-Jones in a losing situation with the air the ball out, and he's the third receiver on the team. He has these weeks where he blows up. It makes sense to play Donovan Peoples-Jones, but I don't love that entirely. That's just something that sketches me out a little bit. So let's go ahead and build a lineup. You ready to build a lineup?
I'm scared. I'm so scared right now.
I would be scared too. All right, so let me go over Chrome tab, share the screen. All right. So here we go. We got to build a lineup, right? We got to sit there. We got to figure out who we want to play. And I said, hey, let's try and figure out how to pick, Derrick Henry and get him in our lineups. But that, Derrick Henry and Kamara, and figure out how to get them in our lineups. But I don't want to dictate the terms. This is pretty much your roster, and I'm just here to, kind of guide to an extent. So do we want to start out with picking out our studs and figure out who we want to play no matter what, and then move on from there?
Yeah. I think that was the drum that we were banging all along. So let's start there.
You want to start out with the running backs?
Man, I love a good challenge. So go ahead and fire up Henry and Kamara. Let's see what we can piece together with this.
Yeah, I mean, we can't backtrack too much once we've been there. We can switch a player out or something. Like, if we want to switch out, let's just say we go down the line and all of a sudden we want to switch out Dobbins for Henry. That's cool. Can't backtrack too much. We can't reset the lineup because people will get bored. They'll turn off the podcast. So let's go ahead. Let's fit in Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. All right, so we need a wide receiver stud. We need a stud who's going to make sure we get the points for wide receiver, and then we'll go ahead and we'll build the lineup because I don't think we actually have a clear view on who's going to be the stud for tight end, right? So let's at least get a stud for the wide receiver. Who are we picking up as our stud wide receiver option?
Let's stick to your lock plays earlier, and let's get Juju in there.
Sounds good. All right, so we have our lock studs. Let's go ahead and grab our stack. Who are we starting out stack-wise? I mean, Lamar Jackson's sexy. We compare him with A.J. Brown. We can get in Hollywood. Like, we can end up playing, Mark Andrews. And no, I'm just kidding. But seriously, like, who are we going to go with the quarterback position? You're up on the clock.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of salary already off the board. We've got a lot of ownership, and presumably in Juju as well. So I'm going unique here, and I'm going with our man, Mitchell Trubisky, and running him back with a dirt cheap Anthony Miller.
Dude, fuck yes. Love it.
This is so dirty.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's so dirty. Oh, man, that boosts us up a little bit to 4,500 per player. We needed a DST. Do you want to go there next and try and figure out like the DST that we want to play? Because those are cheaper, and those will give us more of an idea of how much salary we have left because they're so, I guess, pivotal.
Yes, and this is exactly the point in my lineup where I start looking at DST. I get to my average remaining per player. Beautiful. I start to freak out a little bit, and so I go and get my cheapest option out there, right?
I love it.
So
we're like 2 pieces of pod, man. This is amazing.
Yeah, this is perfect. We should do this every week. So
we will be doing it next week as well.
I think the Saints are the chalky defense, and that coupled with the fact that we just stacked up Trubisky, we're off on that point. So really for me, they all sort of blend together to be just about the same. Whenever I look at that point, I typically go towards like the cheapest option of the lot. But actually for this build, I'm going to go with the Ravens. I do think that when we think about just the skill set of their defensive players, there is a bit of a higher propensity to go after and potentially even turn over the ball. So whenever I'm sort of punting or pseudo punting on defense, I typically prioritize turnovers. And the Ravens of this kind of lower tier are certainly the most capable defense of getting that turnover. So lock them in for me at 3,300.
I am huge on turnovers. I just want you to know, it's like I'm huge on turnovers. I mean, I sat there and I played 1 week. I played, it was the Rams defense. I mean, I'm sorry, it was the Rams versus Tampa Bay, and they won the highest scoring games of the week. But I'm like, James Winston turns over the ball. This is going to be a high scoring game, but this could be a game where the Rams return 2 touchdowns, or whatever the case was. No, it was where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it wasn't even James Winston, it was Jared Goff at the time because Jared Goff was turning the ball over a ton within a 3-week span. So I ended up picking up that one, and I think Ndamukong Suh ended up returning a fumble for a touchdown. So I'm a huge proponent of that. But we're sitting there, we're looking at it, right? And Cleveland's offense is going to be marred. Like, they don't have Joe Bitonio, who is the number one, run blocking guard. Meanwhile, he's very good in pass blocking as well. They don't have their offensive play callers. They're not going to have anybody. Are you sure you don't want to pay up $300 to go with the Steelers, who are one of the best defenses in the league, who guarantee you sacks?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think if you want to try to pivot off that, it's the spot to go to. They're probably a bit more consistent and safe, with regard to their defensive production. But starting out our build with Henry and with Kamara, we're going to need every dollar that we can get. So as we continue to go through this build, if there are a couple of spots that you maybe want to pivot off of and free up a few $100, then I definitely agree that Pittsburgh is the place to pivot off of the Ravens too. But for now, I mean, we're bargain shopping, baby. We got to save every dollar.
I'll take it. All right, so we're going with the Ravens. All right, let's go ahead and let's figure out, do you want to do tight end and then figure out the flex next and then finish up with wide receiver?
Yeah. So at tight end, this is where I'm going to look for a bit more correlation and really looking to take advantage of this banged up middle linebacker Roquan Smith for the Bears. So I'm going to save a little bit of money, going to avoid the chocolate Mark Andrews. I'm actually going to dial in Jared Cook here at my tight end. So got a nice little 2x2 stack in what projects to be maybe the lowest owned of the 3 games.
I totally thought that you were going to go to Cole Kmet when you first started that. Like when you first started out, I thought you were going to go Cole Kmet because the join our circle _ chat is just nuts about Cole Kmet. I can't deal with it, but it's okay.
Man, anyone in Dynasty loves him some Cole Kmet. I think he was like the 3rd tight end off the board in this Dynasty startup we just did. People love them. Some Cole Kmet.
What?
It was wild. I think a few of them are in here. Jay's in here making some noise. Jay, keep me honest on where Cole Kmet went.
Oh my God! All right, that's crazy. Okay, so while we're there, let's go ahead and you're talking about correlation, right? And I don't think Anthony Miller is going to make Mitch Trubisky relevant. So we're sitting there, and I feel like we have to at this point start like Allen Robinson. Right? I mean, he is a little more expensive. He's going to make us play a flyer. We plug him in real quick. I'll leave us 3,800, so we're going to have to play a flyer. But I feel like Allen Robinson is a must play at this point if you're going to play Trubisky.
Yeah, so that's the stack, right? We are all in on this New Orleans Chicago game. So I've got Robinson in there at the wide receiver spot, and in there at the flex position, there are some of those lower price darts that can at least potentially offer up a bit of scoring upside. So go ahead and get Robinson in there.
Eric Ebron's out.
Is he? I hadn't seen that.
I'm looking at it right now. Hold on, we'll pull it up. We'll pull up the notes.
Oh yeah, I see him now.
Wait, he got activated? I'm very confused by this news. It says he just got activated, but he's out.
Fake news is everywhere. He's both activated and out at the same time.
I am very confused right now. Can you update me on that? Like, do you know what's going on? You're frozen.
Don't specifically. Actually, when you just brought that up was the first time that I'd saw it, and the news is contradictory to the tag.
It's so weird. All right, so sitting there and figuring out where we want to play. Johnny Smith, by the way, got a touchdown the last time they played, and doing a 2 tight end stack is very contrarian. We also have Marquez Callaway, who brought up Devin Duvernay, who, we don't really want to play. Miles Boykin, who's been scoring. I mean, this is what we talked about. This is what we prepared for. We prepared. We jumped in and we prepared for this to happen. But where are we going to go? Because I don't feel prepared.
Yeah, I'm feeling a little vulnerable myself. I'll probably look to fade Jonnu out of this lot. I do think that a 2 tight end build is a really unique roster construction, but really ever since they've lost their tackle in Tennessee, he's basically just in there for blocking purposes. So the decision for me comes down.
He ran routes on 80% of the plays last week, man. He's been running routes They just aren't looking at him as much. It's kind of crazy. Like that's the same thing that I did research on at first, but it's like they just don't look at him anymore.
Yeah, it's really odd how he's got this sort of tale of two seasons, right? I think at one point he was tight end 2 or 3 in fantasy points, and then the back half of the season he's just an afterthought. So that sort of variability and sort of identifying the trend here more recently has me at least avoiding Jonnu Smith in this build. So for me, it really boils down to Boykin or Sneed. I think it's fair to consider Graham, but that is just so much exposure to this Chicago offense that I'm probably crossing him off the list as well. So for where we sit today, I'll go ahead and put Boykin in there. But if Sneed is activated, which he's at least trending that way, I sort of
God, your cutout points are the
kind of boom or bust nature that Boykin brings in.
So I don't know if everybody else heard that, but you've had cutout points where it's like the worst timing you could possibly have. And so you said, if Sneed is activated, blank happens, and I didn't hear the rest.
Yeah, so basically what I was saying is I'll put Boykin in now.
Yep.
But if Sneed's activated, that's the way that I'm going on that sort of one for one decision.
All right, so we're gonna go Boykin for now.
Yeah, get Boykin.
We need some exposure, man. This is the highest scoring game on the slate, and we have 1 share or 2 shares, I guess. Baltimore's defense and then Tennessee. So we're hoping for that lineup to just completely bust.
Yeah, this build is going to get you into either the top 10 or into last place. So crack open a drink for that nightcap on Sunday night and hope for some points in New Orleans.
We have $0 left. Is there anybody that we want to pivot down to? Like, do we want to pivot down to Duvernay maybe and grab that other defense, or?
Yeah, so at least with this build, right, we're really kind of banking on a lower scoring game in this Baltimore Tennessee outing. So I'm comfortable with them in there. Honestly, if I'm looking at a pivot, it might be moving off of Kamara and into Dobbins, and then maybe looking to bump up one of those dart throw wide receivers into kind of that mid-tier range. So we set out on a pretty difficult challenge of fitting in Henry and Kamara into the same build. So if I'm looking for some salary relief and a place to pivot, it's going to be off of one of those two.
Love it, man. Absolutely love it. This was one of my favorite shows I've ever done. Rosalie Michaels has you beat one time. Rosalie Michaels, she's amazing, but she has you beat. She has you beat one time. Meanwhile, it was a very pleasurable experience, if I may say so myself.
Oh, it was all mine. We'll run it back next week.
I'm ready, man. We're gonna be doing this stuff, everybody, for next Sunday as well, or maybe next Saturday. We got to figure out which slate we want to cover. But this was fun. And I love covering these small slates. These are my favorite slates to go after, but just because, I want my guaranteed points, and then I just want to take shots after that. But anyways, let everybody know where to find you real quick.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. I am at FantasyNav. You can see it there in my nameplate too. In terms of where I contribute, I'm moonlighting over here at Fantasy Intervention. So check us out at Join Our Circle, and then I also write a couple of different weekly.
Join Our Circle _.
Join Our Circle _. Don't forget the underscore.
Yeah, no.
And then I also write a couple.
If you end up forgetting the underscore, then you're gonna end up with a knitting company. Do you not see Frank Duffy's thing? I've been trying to buy it off them forever now. It's crazy.
I'll leave the audience to decide which they'd rather interact with. I mean, knitting is pretty dope. But in terms of where you can find my work, I write a few different weekly articles, mainly around DFS and around prop bets for goingfor2.com. So if you're following me on Twitter at FantasyNav, you'll see some of our articles pop up there. You can also check out goingfor2.com for all of the great work that myself and the rest of the team are putting out. We're cranking out a bunch of content, so check it out, goingfor2.com.
Golf clap, just because I think a regular clap would be way too loud.
Fair.
I love it, man. Love you guys over there at Going for Two. Phenomenal company. Make sure you guys check them out. And make sure you guys check us out. Join our circle _. Join our circle _ Now, but guys, like the biggest way y'all can help out, guys and girls, biggest way y'all can help out is by going to youtube.com/fantasy intervention. youtube.com/fantasy intervention, hitting subscribe. We have some big things happening. Oh my God, I'm so ready for Matt Miller to come on. I am nervous. I'm shaking. You see my hand? I'm shaking.
You'll be all right.
This is actually fake shaking, but still. Yeah, I can't wait. Like, I'm so anxious. I'm so excited. Like, I wish I could wake up tomorrow. This is going to be like Christmas. Matt Miller is coming on my podcast. Are you kidding me? I'm excited. But still excited to have you on tonight. This is one of the best conversations I've had for DFS since I started this. So I enjoyed your company. Listen, I appreciate you all for listening in. Hope you guys enjoyed. And thank you all for letting us intervene with your fantasy football life. We're out.